why do you believe collectively black people are so resilient, and is resistance one of the epigenetic inheritances from our ancestors?
It's like there's I practice the Yoruba spiritual or scientific sacred approach to understanding divinity and cosmology and ecology. And in there's one character who you also find in the voodoo system, and it's called Ogun. Ogun, some people say, is the god of iron, the god of war. But Ogun, in the system of African sacred science, is the forces of transformation. But transformation comes as a result of pressure being placed upon an object. The way Ogun is manifest in our culture is that it's a piece of rock that's full of impurities and probabilities that would not be useful for the future tasks that this rock has to face. So the rock is put in the fire, and the heat is raised to a level that you burn out these impurities. And then you use a hammer to put pressure on that hot rock that the impurities have been burned out to mold it into a useful tool for society. And African people is like that rock that makes up the concept called Ogun, that goes through the transformation that eliminates the impurities of character based on the pressure that's placed upon the rock itself. And so we were under such pressure to survive in a world dominated by the uncivilized ignorance of the European personality, especially here in the Western Hemisphere. And I says the ignorant, uncivilized personality, because history will bear that out, that they didn't bring to the Americas any technology of any significance. They brought Africans to America who had the technologies of significance for the agriculture, for the industry building, for the timber industry, and on and on. This is the Africans being brought to the Western Hemisphere, to the Caribbean, the United States, Central South America. We bring the technology from Africa, and we build the corporate structure under pressure and duress, the barrel of the gun and the sling of the sword, for hundreds of years. Out of that kind of pressure, where we're not allowed to speak our language. Now, language is how you reinterpret yourself. We're not allowed to practice our culture. Our culture is how you give birth to yourself. We're not allowed to practice our family structure. That is how you create the unity that allowed for the safety and well-being of the self. They took all of that away from us deliberately in order to create a non-functional social being. And we had to create new ways of being social beings without being destroyed. And it's that pressure that has produced this extraordinary black man and woman, particularly in North America, because North America is made up primarily of the North Americans and the black Caribbean. We built North America, going back to the 1500s really, but particularly from the 1700s on. And so we've shown the world that the more pressure you put on the black man and woman, the greater product you're going to get responding to the challenges they have to meet. And we've done that over and over and over again, because that is what being African is about. We are the first manifestation of the human being. When the divine, if you want to call it God, the divine, the universe, the all in all, the one in one, when it decided to manifest as a human being, just as it decided to manifest as a butterfly or a mango tree, it manifests as a black woman, right? And she gave manifestation to the rest of us, including the white man, the Asian man, and all the other men and women in the world. Starts with this black woman. No science can prove anything different, you know? And so that's not just a theory, that has been the demonstrated practice of the way of life of African people, particularly in this hemisphere because of the particular kind of pressure we were put under, especially in the Caribbean and in North America.
Epigenetics, right? When people usually speak about it, they speak about negative inheritance, but we don't speak about the positive inheritances.
Right. Well, people who talk about epigenetics and then they only base themselves on the negative, that's a choice, you know, to deal with defamation of character, when, especially from a dominant group that use defamation to control the other parties. So if one look at the African who had been under the genocide of the transatlantic slave trade, the genocide of 500 years of chattel enslavement in the Americas, when you look at that kind of abuse where you no longer had control of your body, someone can rape you at will, men or women, you can be abused at will by people who were lesser beings than you physically, but because you had chains on your ankles and a gun at your head. And yet, you can come out of that with a humanity that makes their version of humanity pale. And that's throughout our history in this hemisphere. And yet, in one generation, we can produce writers and artists and artisans and doctors and lawyers and engineers that can compete with anyone they have. One generation with opportunity and freedom to demonstrate our possibilities. No one can compete with us. And so the African in the Western world, if you look at our literature, if you look at our production capability in terms of helping to construct society, if you look at our role in government in producing laws that was good for humanity, if you look at the educational system and look at our production and how to better train human beings to be better human beings, no one can compete with the African American, despite the crisis they were forced into. You know, we are the universe. Everyone knows that. You know, if you just look at us in sports, no one can compete with us on a level playing field where we don't come out victorious, equal to or better than anybody on that playing field in any art form that's presented. You know, in the classroom, let me into Harvard, let me into Princeton, I can compete with anybody you've let into Harvard and Princeton, or Oxford, or the Levant. So the African American and the African worldwide, and I don't like to even use the adjectives when we talk about world African, we're just talking about African peoples. And when you look at colonialism and the genocidal damage it had on the continent of Africa and the populations of our people on the continent of Africa, and the resilience of that population in responding against that type of human deprivation, there's nothing equal to it in the annals of history. And even when we respond to throw off the yoke of their genocidal tyranny, we do not commit genocide against them in reprisals, in any cases. You know, you can't compete with that. The African don't have to be apologetic to anybody about their behavior. The few that are so damaged and bruised and broken that they're committing the petty crimes around the communities we lived in, they're doing that because they've been put in that position. You know, you break and you fracture and you destroy someone to such a point, there's no hope, there's no opportunity that can be dreamt up in their mind for themselves. And then you blame them after deprivating them to that level or that depth of depravity when they respond in what we call crime. And yet the greatest crimes we see committed in the world, genocide committing against other peoples, we see that genocide being committed in Palestine right now. No one calls it genocide. We see that genocide committed in the Congo, greater than the one in Palestine right now, by the same Western corporate structure that supports what's going on in Palestine. No one calls it genocide. We see it all over Africa, where African governments who are just trying to be free and exercise the democratic freedom that the Western world say is appropriate, then they're sanctioned for wanting to be free. As long as they would continue into colonial slavery and economic, political, and social genocide, they're welcome into the Western world as brothers and sisters to be subjugated by the Western world. And so when Africans demonstrate this level of humanity, despite the inhumanity done to them, and still can be productive within the economic arena, the political arena, and the social arena, the world appears to be in a state of shock, but yet never learn from it in terms of how they alter their own behavior. But we, the Africans of the world, I think we are still, it's in our genes to understand that we are the universe manifesting itself as a human being.